Right. We are recording again. Chapter 13. Last week you said something really interesting, Jeff, that's stimulated a lot of valuable conversation in the other group between especially Kate and yourself and I. And last week you said, the reason I'm bringing in Kate and Jonathan, who can't be with us today because they're both doing other things, you said you weren't looking forward to doing this chapter. It was going to be a slog, and Kate sort of like took that up and said, right, I'm going to find something. And what's it, 168 hours, more or less, 7 days, 6-7 days have passed since we recorded. What's happened in the meantime?
Something like endosymbiosis, or the imago process of the butterfly emerging from the. I don't mean to be silly and sentimental, but I note here it's just the two of us. I note that in large part I was able to untangle my my own self-imposed limitations, partly because I have real limitations as relates to the way this chapter is presented. And so, but Kate, just, it inspires me. Yes, it inspired me to go ahead and make a run at it again. And even as I was this time listening to it before we joined each other here, I found the middle part of the chapter really difficult, and it has to do with my limitations because I'm not a mathematist, and I have impatience for sort of one-sided rationality, and I think it's part of the problem of involuntary. It's an involuntary way of thinking that comes out of empiricism, the coarse empiricism, and
can I ask you be a bit more specific? Which dry part of the chapter are you talking about?
Well, after the introduction, he goes into this sort of this rational weighing, and then sort of ratioing the notion of value, which I have a
positives and negatives
sort of a
on the happiness
sort of
scale, on the pleasure
and
scale.
so the tribunal of reason is what he sort of sarcastically and twice refers to it as, and I know that that's not. It's just so out of keeping with the rest of the book that he then actually, but he's using the tribunal of reason to show how, in a way, absurd it is to use reason only to judge whether or not life is worth living, essentially. And he meant, this is interesting because this, well, okay, let me just stay on topic here. So what happened then is I started to see something opened up for me, and I started to see this chapter in relationship to the previous two chapters. And so obviously purpose is connected with value, and moral imagination is the thing that sort of is sandwiched between value and purpose. And of course they're isomorphic. They're separate sort of existential and epistemological functions within the knowledge process, or the human, very human process of negotiating the world. And so then I was reminded, and this is a glimpse I've had before, how much this chapter is really about desire. And what is he going to do? Just go talk phenomenologically about desire? It would just be a mess. So in a way, he uses the sort of cogency of the rational mind and mathematism in order to draw out the importance, in a way, the ennobling of desire in the face of his time, when there's all of this notion that desire should be eradicated. And we talked previously that I didn't realize how much von Hartmann, who is the sort of godfather of the unconscious in Western weaponized psychological terms,
Yeah.
And Schopenhauer were influenced by Eastern thought, but 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 sort of stuffed into a rational approach, where the Easterns didn't go there at all. In if I can overgeneralize about Eastern thought, but it generally results in things like compassion and some reconciling relationship with human desires, not the negation of the will and desire itself. And
Because
of
there's still
course,
like a connection to the whole in a way that isn't there in an individualized, highly individualized society.
that's really well put, because what we're meant to do is metamorphose into this next phase in relationship with desire, not just adopt an Eastern, um, a rationalized version of an Eastern thought process that has great wisdom in it, but needs to go through its own human metamorphosis, right? And so this chapter really is actually doing this. It's
Yeah.
actually achieving this, as I said in the previous two chapters. Rudolf Steiner put us back into nature. If you're available to what he's saying, we experience ourselves as separate from nature. It's just part of the consciousness of our time. And he epistemologically and phenomenologically puts us back into nature, but as human beings with a human nature that is unique to what it is to be a human being. And that's a major achievement in the previous chapter when he deals with Darwin. So this is a metamorphosis, this chapter, and I see it that way now. And it was particularly poignant the way in which all of you who spoke before I spoke, and I broke down in sort of kind of joy and feeling the suffering aspect, and the worthwhileness of the suffering aspect. And then of course we're coming up on Easter time, and the willing suffering there is very humbling and moving. And so I was moved beyond words, and my words didn't come out very well. But I really credit the group work that we've done, as you mentioned, and reminded me of, that I would not have come to that if we weren't doing this group work. I probably would have glossed over this chapter again, as I have in the
Like
past.
yourself, I haven't seen sort of the immense value that's in this chapter. It came out so clearly this time. But we'll get there. Let's just dwell a little bit on Schopenhauer and Hartmann, because as you've already been alluding to, they play a key role in this chapter. He introduces Schopenhauer and Hartmann. So what do I think is going on there? I want to build on what you were saying about this Oriental basis in their thinking, because both Schopenhauer and Hartmann, they were deeply steeped in Eastern thinking, and Eastern thinking, which is also embedded in a spiritual conception of life. The gods are still alive in Hinduism. Even in Buddhism, there is still definitely the aspect of nirvana. It's a state of liberation. So there's still something that goes beyond the material life. So they are deeply embedded in this, because I know Schopenhauer, I mean, he waxes lyrical about the Bhagavad Gita, and I also wax lyrical about the Bhagavad Gita. It is an incredible book. The conversations between Arjuna and Krishna, and the same with the Upanishads, which for which Schopenhauer sort of like couldn't stop talking positively about. There is such a beauty in these world conceptions. But at least my experience is the beauty is that I can fully take on board this idea that there is a spiritual world. There is a life that feeds into this life, and we've got this continual, it's like breathing in, breathing out process. We are doing the will of the gods, and the gods are working through us. This is the conversation that Arjuna has with Krishna in, I believe it's chapter 10 of the Bhagavad Gita. He's basically just saying, it's like you you are you're a manifestation of my will. So there's a lot of beauty in there. I'm not saying it's not unproblematic, but there's so you've got this one side, this really ennobling aspect of Oriental thinking, but you've also got another aspect of Oriental thinking, which is the Maya. So this world is illusion. This isn't where the real life is happening. Real life is beyond this life. And whereas the Oriental thinking, at least from my perspective, they managed to hold it together. It's like, especially in works like the Upanishads and the Bhagavad Gita. I'm less sure about other areas, but they managed to hold it together so that it creates a value. I don't want to say a value system, but a way of looking in life that enhances it. But Schopenhauer and Hartmann don't bring that with them. Schopenhauer, as we've seen it in the Riddles of Philosophy, and I think it was back in chapter 3 or 4, so that will is an irrational, blind force that acts through our lives, and we have no control over it. And I think you're going to want to come in about the unconscious in a little bit, but and Hartmann doesn't do anything to remedy this situation. Instead, he talks about, so like, we've got to suffer for God, but God is no longer so like this loving, so like Christian being. No, he's just so like this. He's this metaphysical entity that is inaccessible, and he takes like the worst aspect, some of the worst aspects of Christian thinking, like the unknowability of God. We have to be humble in respect to this type of knowledge, but this assumption that we cannot know is so paralyzing, it's so deadening to the human soul. And that's what comes across so loud and clear through these guys. And this is how he sets up the chapter. These two guys are like saying how crap life is, and then he gets into this rationale of weighing up pleasures against displeasures.
Can I, before we get into the unconscious, and it's interesting that. So here's what I want to say first: that in spiritual science is a foundation for social forms. Steiner creates the proper, in many other places too, but for me, creates the proper bridge from the past into the present, across the abyss, across the sort of existential Rubicon that the existentialists weren't able to cross. And the psychologists certainly muddled about in as if what they thought of as the abyss were real, but it's a manufactured unconscious. So, but I want to.
Can I summarize what you're saying about existential? Just to correct me if I'm misunderstanding you. So the existentialists, so that they're saying go out and enjoy life, but there's no meaning. Oh, because there's no meaning to it. That's I believe that's the position you're coming from. Correct?
Yes, or embrace the angst and the meaninglessness of life, and bite the head off the snake. That's the Nietzschean encouragement that I got when I was a young man, and it's important. It's an important step, but it was also Nietzsche who really was the godfather of existentialism, and was the one that uncovered the death of God for meaning in culture, and meaning creation and value creation in culture, which is what this chapter is really about, is where value creation actually occurs. Yeah. But in spiritual science as a foundation for social forms, he you were talking about the Eastern notion of something
Right.
that held them together, that
Yeah.
there wasn't this abstract beyond, whether it was natural selection as a metaphysically real force, or God, Hartmann or Spinozan God. It was, for Steiner, it was, we have to remember not what happens after death or what's beyond this life, but what's before it.
Mhm.
And the thread that runs through, um, the thread that we can pull through, is the memory of our pre-existence, our pre-birth life, not afterlife, because the afterlife will always have these abstractions, and there'll be this bizarre death, uh, relationship with death as the unknowable, as the sleep, that sort of thing, as opposed to a awakening into something,
Mhm.
which is, if you remember, the metamorphic thread that weaves through your existence, then you're waking up to a supra consciousness, and that is the seat of what they're calling the unconscious, and it's been weaponized in psychology, and unintentionally. I mean, there's really great people trying to do great things, but if you can't accept that there's a thread, that a metamorphic thread that is spiritual, that pulls through, then it's the fox watching the henhouse with the soul. It's psychology looking at psychology. And it's narcissistic.
When when you say psychology is being weaponized so like unwittingly, I'm not so sure I agree. Um, Unfortunately, there are some really evil people in the world that really are all about domination, uh, trying to keep people in a slave-like mentality. And I think one of the reasons I am less generous than you in that regard is a series of lectures that I read, 178, which is, but it's in part, it's a historical account of how the secret brotherhoods did, it's like, use different methods to try and manipulate the minds. Now, the extent to which, let's say, Bernays, was it the cousin of Freud? Let's give him the benefit of the doubt. Let's say he wasn't sort of like one of these like secret brotherhood members. He just like he stumbled across this and so like accidentally like polluted the world with all of his let's let's pollute the minds of people with different ideas. Let's trick them into believing they want something that they don't really want. Let's be generous and say he did that all unwittingly. Um, there were certainly people who did this in full consciousness, and it wouldn't surprise me if at some later stage, so like I found out that actually Bernays, he was in with let's say the Masons, or let's say another brotherhood whose name I don't know, because these are hugely powerful psychological weapons which have dominated the past 100 years of human life, and it feels like we're beginning to see how they are being weaponized to a further degree just in the last 3 years, especially. It really is
Yeah,
quite incredible.
yeah, I totally agree with you. So when I say psychology weaponized, I don't think von Hartmann was weaponizing it or intended to weaponize it. He thought he was doing good, which is why
Mhm.
Steiner was trying to get him off it. And Freud and Jung thought they were doing good, and maybe even Bernays thought what he was doing was innocuous, say.
Mhm.
But this is a really important conversation to this chapter, because uh, because if that which is unconscious is unaccessible to us, uh, only or only indirectly, sort of through shadow work and through the sort of methodology of psychoanalysis and the methodologies that can be helpful tools in a kind of from a kind of pragmatist perspective, meaning American pragmatism perspective, that those are tools that could be used, but we can't really access what is true to human nature, which is blind impulses, and they'll always be blind. And that sets up this process in this industry that Bernays creates, which it results in two streams. One is the public relations industry, and a hyper extension of propaganda. And Zak Stein is the most educated person on propaganda that I have heard speak. And hopefully Zak will be joining us here in a few weeks. And maybe this is
like
where
a
we
wonderful
go.
Potential conversation there.
Indeed. So let's explore that a little bit, because he describes the sort of history of propaganda, and propaganda has always existed. It existed, and it went into a bit of, say, technological hyperdrive when the printing press was invented. And John Albert Comenius did a really good job of using the printing press as an educational tool to try to universalize education and bring and level up societies. Like he traveled all around and talked to all of the most important people in Europe, and like kings, right? And he was consulted for this, and he was also a deep esotericist, which is another thing we could talk about with Zak. But then also the 30 Years' War this is when heaven and hell came to the fore. The church started to use these devices to rent people asunder, so to speak, to get them under control. And so this propaganda thing's not new, right? And then you have the advent of radio and the advent of mass communication, and you see Bernays go, hey, and we understand people in a new way, right? In this religion almost of psychology, I used to call it, when I was busting free from the institutional prejudices associated with it. And you can see that psychology itself as a field is really great work of Piaget, and who didn't consider himself a psychologist, by the way, but more of an existentialist philosopher, I think. But then and all of the people operating within the field of psychology, forwarding it at the same time, this public relations industry it has an advertising element, and people's desires are being manipulated. Cigarettes are good, there's they're good for
lighting
you.
up for freedom.
Right, the American Heart Association, which is peopled by the refined foods industry, and we've got a nutritional crisis that's still going on in America because people bought that. The medical industrial complex, germ theory, all of it issuing forth out of a growing contributor to the GDP, say, and then it gets more and more, I would say. The effectiveness of advertising and taking the ability to sort of take advantage of this notion of the unconscious and then narrate it back to people as if this were an absolute truth that had religious significance, but certainly spiritual significance to everybody. And so there's a certain sort of shame associated with the unconscious, but also a fetishization that comes out the other side. And both of those things are now available for manipulation. And boy, we will get to this toward the end of our chat, because he's dealing with Lucifer and Ahriman at the end of this chapter. And I just realized that this read through just before we met again, in order, which is purpose, and in desire, unfettered. Right, but if the two aren't morally imaginatively balanced, then we're going to be easily manipulatable through this weaponizing of psychology. And so that's the way in which psychology was weaponized. And please, this is exactly our psyches have now been commodified through these media forms, right? And AI.
This aspect of desire, I think it's also traceable back to Oriental thinking, so like as brought to us through Schopenhauer and Hartmann here, because it is desire. You've got to you had to kill desire to be able to become initiated in ancient Oriental societies. So desire was sort of like considered morally untoward. So like it was preventing you from realizing the spark of God in yourself from that perspective. And this is what's so interesting, is that here it's like desire has sort of like been transformed. Instead of it being something you try to get rid of, it's something where you were describing with the existentialist. It's something that's like you just use that to enhance life, and you fall deeper into this world of satisfying desires. So in that sense, it becomes completely opposite to anything the Orientals might have thought about the usefulness of desire. But and this is the absolute magic, which you were touching on with Lucifer here, is the absolute magic is striving becomes this complete redemption, striving towards we talked briefly about the moral maxims in previous, but it's like if I have a striving to my own best ability, using my moral imagination, moral technique, a striving to somehow improve society, then I am using desire, the feeling life, in a healthy way to somehow contribute. So rather than killing it, which would have been an Oriental, I'm talking about ancient Oriental thinking here. I'm not referring to modern Oriental thinking specifically. So it was in the past, it would have been quashed. And when you talked about the church as well, this was also a way of like quashing the desires. But we've moved into an age where no, you can't quash them. You've got to strengthen them. You've got to feed them so that they can work even more destructively in society. And Steiner is waking us up here to the idea that no, desires can be ennobled, and he calls it striving. And this was something I'd never recognized before in this chapter, this absolute transformation of the importance of the feeling life in driving our action, and understanding how if this is corrupted through weaponized psychology in its billions of manifestations, then we are on a fast train to hell. And we have to take individual responsibility and say, yeah, I've got this life, I've got this feeling life, and it's up to me to associate that feeling life with something that enhances society, that helps us move forward in a positive way. So that was really new for me, this read. There's one thing. There was something else I wanted to say in relation to that, but it's escaped my mind. But the second thing on the list is also something I'd like to dig into a little bit deeper. It's like this another Ding and Sich, and we also referred to this a little bit earlier. This thing in itself, this Kantian concept, this creation of something that is beyond our knowing, the tragedy of that notion and what it has, because this is part of the weaponization of psychology as well, isn't it? Saying you are doomed, and you can You can never know about this blind, invisible, irrational will, or in the case of Schopenhauer, or this God who is eternally suffering, and you are part of his. You are somehow part of his redemption, and to redeem God, you have to suffer throughout life. I mean, this is this is really weaponization of the inner life.
Yeah, I found it really interesting that because I struggle with it, like most of the chapters, I look for contemporary. I don't look for, but I'm inspired to see contemporary happenings that this book is so relevant to explain.
Mm-hmm.
And but because I struggle with this one, I largely stayed in less than an inspired state when I read the chapter because of my limitations, as I mentioned. But when Matt particularly, but also other folks brought up the fact that the antenatal movement and the idea that human beings are a scourge on the earth, and that we would be better eliminated, that we would be better non-existent, is certainly a direct result of this lineage, right? It's not the only lineage that sort of nihilistic, or it's not even nihilistic. It's
Humanity hating.
yeah, something like, yeah, I was looking for a clever word, but that's exactly what it is. It's self-loathing, that is particularly of a Western kind. And although Douglas Murray's book War on the West has politically motivated reasoning, which limits the degree to which his brilliance can really flower, to see the epistemological ground for why we're at war with ourselves. Because if you just go back to Kant, you can just see the absolute conflict, the absolute self-contradiction that is everywhere with Kant. And Kreinbuhl really points it out. And what happens because of the contradiction is there's something that can open up in between. So and this is where Steiner, drove a truck through, basically a bus, and said, everybody get on, and nobody did. So he ended up, sort of largely ignored in his time. And we went with the lineage of von Hartmann and the unconscious, and Freud and Jung, and then the public relations industry and propaganda. That's not exactly where I was going to go, but it was a bit of a riff, I think, that could be helpful. I think that the ennobling of the desire needs to be emphasized, because first of all, because of the anti-human sort of social suicide that's going on, and the deworlding of the absolutization of us not being part of the world, only an enemy to the world. And it's really important in this book because he goes to this point in the latter part of it where he says that all of nature is striving, not just human beings, to fulfill their own nature.
Yeah.
So in our spiritual striving arising out of desire, we are inherently trying to fulfill our own human nature. And these three chapters together, purpose, moral imagination, and value rooted in desire, not pleasure. Like happiness is gruel. It's an abstraction. There's no nutrition in it. There's nothing there. Of course, there's rejoicingly wonderful things in the depths of the mysteries of existence arising out of our spiritual impulses, right?
Yeah.
If we see it that way, which is optimistic. This is the thing. At the beginning of the book, he mentions Leibniz and
that's like Shaftesbury, yeah.
And Shaftesbury, right? And it's interesting because I meant to mention this. He doesn't speak about positivism after that. He doesn't argue for it or against it.
Yeah.
The book, in a way, is a support for those two thinkers and many others who would fall in that camp. But Leibniz himself had a conception of reincarnation.
Yeah, it was a natural conclusion. He said, if the world's going to make sense, it's got to be a reality.
At the end of his life, right? It was an intellectual summation. And some people said, he's a doddering old fool, but it's actually, if you have respect for the human being that was Leibniz, he was a brilliant fellow who wrestled with things. He even argued against himself throughout his lifetime as a method. And this is the warm and beautiful conclusion that he came to. It was intellectual, of course, but that is a true threadbearing. Threadbare is not the right word. Weaving together of the Eastern culture into the Western culture, as opposed to this abrupt rationalization through these hyper intellectual, deeply affected by the materialistic scientific outlook people
That's where I want to come in, because I think we're going to be talking a little bit about Schmachtenberger now. So one of the things, obviously Hartmann is a defender of the position that consciousness is not real. Steiner, fundamentals, like the complete opposite. So consciousness is an illusion. And this is also one of the ills of materialistic or of materialism. Any soul spiritual activity for that type of mind is only ever emergent properties. It doesn't have any reality in their world conception. They can't deny that that these phenomena exist, but they can't give them their own reality. Instead, they will link them back to, yeah, these are material processes. They are cause effect, cause effect, cause effect relationships, rather than this fundamental opposite attitude, which is a true spiritual conception of the world means that there are living spiritual beings standing behind us, standing behind world creation. They working in harmony and in disharmony at times to create what it is that we see, so with our senses. And a materialist cannot even begin to conceive that as being reality. The closest they will come to that, my belief is, they'll subscribe to an idea like quantum field theory, where that they can get behind the idea that's like atoms, they come into existence and then they go out of existence back into the quantum field, and that's happening with every atomic particle it's like in the universe. So they can mentally do that, but they can't take it further to say, yeah, and there are also entities, essences, beings that also in a similar way bring life into dead matter, that bring intelligence into dead matter, that bring love into dead matter. All of these things that are like irreconcilable in materialism, they just have to be explained away as emergent properties, emergent behavior. And I think this is part of this consciousness is not real is symptomatic of the illness of a purebred materialist. They can't even rise to it. Somehow, I'm not sure what happens in them. Do they? I think Steiner might say they feel a fear that it's sort of like it's such a paradigm shift in their mental framework that they prefer to sort of like stay within the safety limits of materialism, where they've got their individual understanding of themselves. They've got a firm ground to stand on. And I do remember we've actually talked about this. We're going back probably a couple of months or so now. I to a certain extent, I do understand these people, because we've talked about the value of science, of the scientific methodology, the approach to learning about how the life and the world works, having this framework, this methodological approach to studying life to understand it better, that strengthens our sense of individual being. And what people of a spiritual bent like you and I do, we threaten that, or they think we threaten that. We don't. As Steiner says multiple times in multiple lectures, that true spiritual insight can never be in conflict with observation, material observation. It cannot, because they are two aspects of the same reality. But of course, a person with a materialist mind can't somehow, let's say, swallow that pill, can't red pill him or herself with that. It's like a leap of faith, perhaps. But
I appreciate the integrity of some of the people you probably are referring to, and we talked a little bit before about before we came on about people who are really great thinkers are thinking out of a spiritual perspective. So I have the question: do they have to have a spiritual conception of that, like because at first, for me, I have, and still do to some degree, that I'm limited as a human being. I don't have a relationship with spiritual beings other than other people, right? I've really come to that. Like, we're not like a schizophrenic. Ian McGilchrist illustrates very well, that we live in a schizophrenic, like, essentially, our mass psychosis is something like a delusion that schizophrenics have, which is that we think of ourselves as machines. And I don't think, like you mentioned Schmachtenberger, I don't think Daniel thinks that way. Okay, I think he thinks life is sacred, and I think he thinks he's a powerful, powerful thinker, and he can think out. He can think through a vast epistemological terrain. He can cross valleys from one discipline to the other, and that is a deeply, deeply spiritual activity. That's thinking. It extends out beyond his own notions of worldview. In a sense, you could say his worldview is rather open that way. So? Rather than keep going, I'm going to let the question sit. Do we have to have a spiritual conception? I haven't come to where I've come to without taking some of what Steiner says, which is, as you can imagine, is pretty crazy, fantastical stuff, if you're not steeped in the seamlessness of the way in which it relates to the epistemology and phenomenology that he put great work into. And the other side of that is that you have to experience being. You can't a conception won't replace the actual experience of the being. And I'm sure there are people who have experience of spiritual beings who don't have any conception at all of epistemological and phenomenological kind. That's been my path. And so I see somebody like Daniel as just, he may already be considering it, and he's just operating in a way that is he thinks is effective. But if there is a veil, it's extremely thin veil for somebody who has the spiritual activity occurring in him, like the thinking that he does. And I would submit also that Zak is similarly situated. So do you have to have a spiritual conception? Do you have to propagate that spiritual conception in order to be a spiritual?
We are all completely free. It's what Stein is telling us. We can be materialists, we can be spiritists, we can be whatever we like. What we have to do is we have to take the consequences of our worldviews. And that's where the conversation becomes, I think, more interesting. So we definitely need people who specialize in really understanding material processes very thoroughly, and like you're talking about Schmachtenberger and Liv, that the video that you got me to watch. I think you listen to eloquent people who really do know their stuff, but then they come to something like the Moloch, and for them it's just a it's the same monster that Hartmann has created, or that Schopenhauer has created. It's something that we are not capable of even understanding. Now, in the philosophy of freedom, we don't, well, at least I can't think on my feet quickly enough to see a link there. But certainly in anthroposophical literature, we can begin to work with conceptions that help us to frame this story, this narrative in a completely different way, which can make us aware of things. Let me give a random example. Another video that you sent me, the one about AI. So there's some deeply fascinating stuff in there. One of the little snippets that I remember clearly is they also talk about emergent behavior in these systems as well. So they give several examples in this video, but one of the examples is how artificial intelligence has created a theory of mind. Now, the programmers never got it to create a theory of mind. And then they describe in the video how people will have to fact check me, but let's say it was 3 years ago, the artificial intelligence had a theory of mind equivalent to a 4-year-old. And then in 2022, it was of a 7-year-old. And in 23 now, February, when the video was made, it had a theory of mind that it was equivalent to a 9-year-old. Now, what was most shocking to these people is that they only discovered this fact 1 month ago. These are emergent in the framework of materialist thinkers. These are inexplicable developments of technology. But if we come at this from the angle that we really have to do with spiritual beings which are recognizable in certain ways, because this is what Steiner gives us outside of the philosophy of freedom, a framework for recognizing the activity of these beings. And it's not like just labeling them good or evil, because also Steiner says that evil that these beings are there, in a Nietzschean sense, to strengthen us. This idea, what doesn't kill us strengthens us. So it is through meeting with opposition that we up our game as human beings. We grow spiritually. And so all of these type of conversations that we can have about the value of struggling, the value of striving, they are moved to another arena. And I certainly don't want to say they're not valuable when somebody of a purely materialist worldview tackles these. But a spiritual conception gives you another paradigm with which to look at it. And this is part of the real value to me of this type of work, that connecting that thought. So I'm also this as a spiritual worldview means that I can also reconnect with all past civilizations. If we look back in history, let's go back to the ancient Egyptians. I mean, the gods were everywhere there. So as a materialist, I've got two. I'm going to play with the idea of there are just two ideas. These people were completely and utterly bonkers. They didn't know what they're talking about, so they invented a load of gods. Okay, one interpretation. Meaningless history. I can't connect myself with it. I take it's like an anthroposophical view, which is grows out of the philosophy of freedom, and say, no, this thinking activity is a spiritual activity, and it's connected to the spiritual world. And if I allow this activity to grow within me, I begin to recognize how it was active in ancient Egypt and in humanity's prehistory. So instead of cutting myself off from the whole flow of the history of humanity, I experience it as part of my history. It becomes accessible, it becomes believable, it becomes real. I don't have to dismiss it. So it's not so much that materialism is wrong, it's a limiting belief. It's one that cuts you off from life, it's one that cuts you off from history.
Yes, and first of all, just a quick statement about materialism. That is, we are all materialists. We just don't know that we are. We've already crossed that threshold. We're dwelling within the material world in a way that is inescapable in a sense. And we used to live in a spiritual world that was the world that we live in, right? And so there was no they wouldn't have said they wouldn't have talked about spiritual beings. The world is spiritual being, and everything is spiritual being, and that this is the way I start to connect with being. Okay, so I wanted to say that. Then I want to say, because of that, it might be this is going to bring in Buell here a little bit, and the idea of negative spiritual activity. Okay, and so I'm going to bookmark that with there's negative spiritual activity in purpose, and there's negative spiritual activity in desire.
Yeah.
Right? And those are very important, purpose and desire. You wouldn't say, let's get rid of purpose and desire, right? A purposeless life is a sad, sad life, and a lot of people lead it because there's a meaning crisis, and they can't put meaning into why they would do something, and you can't motivate yourself if you don't have the other side of it, which is the value that arises out of desire, right? So that they work together. But desire, in an animalistic sense, we've seen, has us easily manipulatable, and we then serve the purpose of people who know how to manipulate us, right? So what I want to say is that what I love about what Daniel's bringing, and what I loved about the video that you're talking about, is a video by I forget.
But I'll put the link in the bottom. Leave somebody, isn't it?
It's Tristan Harris.
Oh, okay. So you're talking about a different video that I haven't seen then.
I think the one I shared on is
the one that I saw was with Leave Boré or something like Leave Boré.
No, I'm talking about the one with Tristan Harris, the one that has Gollum as the being that.
Okay, the AI one. Yes. Okay,
yes,
so I'm with you now. Yeah.
Yes. So that one with Tristan Harris, where Daniel's working with Moloch, which I believe comes from a poem from Blake or Yeats, or I forget. It's a character in a poem.
Yeah.
Also
the Bible, I believe.
We'll have to find. Yeah, in the Bible.
Yeah.
So then So what we're talking about is a being, and perhaps what we're seeing symptomatically, and we not jumping to conclusions about what Daniel's point of view is as relates to the spiritual world, even if he has a self-limiting ontology, a unnecessarily truncated ontology in relationship to what Rudolf Steiner presents as a threefold ontology, say. Even if that's the case, which I don't think it is, because he's a student of Forrest Landry who has a threefold metaphysics, for example, and whether that's a utilitarian one or not is a question that I haven't resolved myself. But these are really important to respect, that people are coming up against or are coming to a threshold. And so what I in a long-winded way was trying to say is that maybe what we have is negative spiritual activity in Ahriman, who is the Molochian character, which has to do with order at all costs, say. And desire, the Luciferic character, which has to do with the upward striving, say, that energy, that upward striving, and but we don't put a being associated with that. We'd say that's the human being, and
Yeah.
we can't trust that one, right? And that's the devil that we say doesn't exist. We're starting to say this other devil does exist, and it's a being. And so
Mhm.
maybe because to me the key is recognizing beingness in the world again,
Mhm.
bringing beingness back from the schizophrenic, as I started to allude to earlier when McGilchrist talks about the schizophrenic. Some schizophrenics actually think they're a machine, and they'll cut themselves open in order to see if there's oil running through them, right? Machine oil, right? So that's we're this close with Yuval Harari or whatever his
Yeah.
goddamn name is, with that sort of insanity, and also moving us into a mechanized version of our current selves. I kind of got lost there. Oh, well, so what I wanted to say is then maybe the gift of this negative spiritual activity, these beings that are negating spiritual activity in a certain sense and trying to make something permanent here, material, just materially permanent, is that they are beings. And if there's a window, well,
Mhm.
if these are beings, then we have to come to relationship with them. And I think that providing this notion of Moloch as Daniel and Liv Bori, I think her name
Mhm.
is pronounced. I'm not sure. Uh, uh, that they bring it, they surface this, that
Yeah.
that it's a concept now that we can start to come to terms with, and it's very contributive. It's very helpful in the light of a spiritual conception of the world, in the light of the spiritual experience of the world.
Mm.
I
I,
think I think that totalized what I wanted to say.
I
Yes, I think also later we can deal with this purpose, desire, and moral imagination. But
I was thinking about. I thought you were going to go off in the direction of value of values and value of life, because I know you've. Um, it's a conversation I've slightly steered clear of. I know you've been talking about videos done by McGilchrist on values, and I believe he did one with Zak Stein, which I started watching, and I must admit I didn't. It didn't feed me, if I can express it like that. But um, this is another aspect of materialism that's problematic for me. Um, what is the yeah, but perhaps this is no. I was going to say what is the value of life? Um, I don't think that's a good question. Um, if I move beyond materialism, like you were mentioning with Leibniz, if I move to understanding life as this interplay between spirit and material, then life becomes something a far richer experience, in the sense that I am part of an eternal process. I think the Upanishads, to come back to Schopenhauer and Hartmann and their love for that, I think some of the verses that they have in there about how reconnecting with this spiritual side to our you've got the immanent and the transcendent, and they are united in us, or they have the possibility to be united in us. And then that transcendent then can sort of like act through us to to work out into the immanent. There's this flow and there's this wholeness, which, if I think back to my it's like 100% materialistic thinking of like 30 plus years ago, that's not even part of my conceivable worldview. This feeling of integration, of wholeness with the world, or to use it's like a Barfield concepts, like this feeling of participation, genuine participation in the world. And not only that do I feel like I'm participating, but like you were alluding to earlier, I really want to do my best to be part of creating better solutions. And someone like Schmachtenberger, he'd be totally on board with we need to do that. But we're coming from, it's like a different conception of what makes up what life, what is life, what is the value of life. And so that was a little bit of a ramble there, but I thought you were going to go and develop, when you started talking 5 minutes ago, I thought you were going to go into the realm of values, because I know you've been thinking about that quite a bit more recently, haven't you?
Yeah, no, and as usual, you have the sense that's where we're moving toward in this conversation. And yes, that was part of what I wanted to say, but I really wanted to get out that it's very exciting to me that there are people contributing to the landscape of perceiving being, and even unwittingly, the beings themselves that are negative spiritual activity. I don't mean negative in a trivial sense. I mean sense of negating the spiritual, which it opens up an avenue for filling that with that which originated in the first place, which was spiritual. So the value of life, really, we don't get to Steiner's conception of that until the end of this chapter, and it does it, and I can see it. I alluded to the being that is desire and the being that is order or purpose. And in purpose, you could be very purposeful in evil, say, just to put it bluntly, and you could be very desirous in evil, of course. But there's no value without desire. Desire is not hooked to pleasure. Pleasure is what does he say? Desire is the measuring stick, and pleasure is that which is being measured. What is created is value, what you value, and so what you value can be what it is to be fully human, and all of nature's striving to be fully what it is. And you don't have to say this in this sense. And I think that another go at Ian and Zach will show that neither one of them are materialists.
Okay.
And Ian is calling for a spiritual a turn, and he's not binding thinking to the brain. He's binding it to attention, and the brain is just a vehicle of attention. Okay, so that's it's hard to get to that point because there's so much of the neurologist in him speaking, and he's and there's a lot of lamenting going on because that's kind of his temperament. But what they're talking about is that the value is inherent to existence, and I think now what I've come to is with Jonathan is that that's not true. It is existence strives to fulfill itself. We need value in order to fulfill ourselves, because without value we won't have any purpose, or our purpose will be without a moral imagination to what it is a human being would be to fulfill itself. So we need the conceptual operational process in order to have an ideal, which is another thing he comes to, for what it means to be that which would transcends us now, but is fulfillment of what we're meant to be. Just like just like a tree is striving, an oak tree. Let's say, what's a better example? What are trees in the Alpine? What are good
pines?
So let's say a pine tree in North Carolina, in the swamplands of North Carolina, is striving to be a pine tree, but it looks completely different than a pine tree on a windswept mountain, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so, but they still both fulfill the striving to be a pine tree. What it is to be a human being is described in this book in a way that we
Yeah.
don't, nobody else has this, nobody I've ever heard has a really good conception of, but you have to go through the process of actually engaging in this process, which has to do with the idealistic conceptualization that is a moral imagination that's tied to reality, the nature of things, including the external nature we refer to, because if we don't, it snaps back at us. And in that sense, all things have value, but we have to engender values
Yeah.
just like we have to engender purpose. And that results in a moral imagination that is, in one sense, sandwiched between them. In another sense, is the imago. Another great conversation between Ian McGilchrist and Benita Roy. I love Benita Roy. She's a funny and but seriously whimsical person, and she's just delightful. And they refer to this imago process that the butterfly goes through, and that it's not an imagination where you know what you're going to be when you come out the other side,
Mm-hmm.
right? That it comes out of the depths of nature, and
Yes.
and in a sense you could say that the butterfly is a different being than the caterpillar, and that this intermediary stage is where the moral imagination, or the imago, the imagination, gives rise to the fulfillment, right? And that's a beautiful picture of what purpose and value do when taken up with moral imagination. And uh, there's no value without purpose, and there's no purpose without value.
And you've helped me remember where I wanted to go with value, because Nietzsche, I can't remember whether we've talked about him whilst we were recording, or whether when we were talking before, but the crisis in values that Nietzsche talks about with the death of God, this is part of what humanity is going through. It's having to create value at an individual level, and this is also really beautifully woven together. This is completely consistent with the idea of we are free beings, because he says it explicitly that the value of life cannot be objectively determined. It is always a subjective striving that I have. But if the more people are aligned with bringing value to life, to celebrating life, to improving life of both oneself and the people around oneself and society, then as long as I am contributing to that in some shape or form, I can feel good about myself, and society benefits from my striving, my redeemed desire. But that cannot be institutionalized. It has to be an individual choice. What values do I choose to have? It is, any institution that tries to impose values on me is an anathema to an individual, and it's an anathema to genuine striving, because that striving has to come from within me. And that striving becomes healthy in society when individuals align themselves with healthy desires, ones which create a society that is imbued with a love, true love, in the sense that there is a compassion and a wanting to understand the other person, but not wanting to dominate the other person, respecting every individual's right to live his or her individual life. And Nietzsche was onto this 100 years ago. that we would be going through this crisis, and we're there big time.
Yes, we are, and as we alluded to earlier, with deep respect Steiner had for Nietzsche, Nietzsche is far in the rearview mirror if people would engage with Steiner's work at the level that he has achieved a human conception that is a true metamorphosis out of human history into a new evolution, a new place of consciousness. Say that there's just no doubt about that in my mind, and I hope that more and more people will engage with his work because of this, because he's shown the way.
Yeah.
And literally, I mean, shown the way. That I wanted to also bring in part of what you were saying. My son just walked in and distracted me, so I lost the thread, but it had to do with being part of fulfilling human nature as part of becoming. Yeah, I lost it.
Okay, I'll go to the last area that I'd like to touch on. That we've mentioned that it's fully reconcilable with free will and the moral life. That the two are mutually supportive. But also, as you live more deeply into this idea of the value at an individual and a societal level of striving, then human agency itself as becoming the instrument for nature waking up to itself, this Goethean idea, of nature created us so that it could become conscious of its own amazingness. And as human beings, we are the agents by which nature is able to participate in itself, but we also do it. It's difficult to find words to express the wholeness, the way in which these ideas they weave beautifully into each other, so that we're not left with this yucky feeling that we get with reading a Schopenhauer, even though there's a lot of insight as to the word of will, and the invisibleness of many forces in life, and the deep insights that Hartmann have, that leave us with a fundamental, oh shit. Here instead, like you're alluding to, with purpose and values and free will and love, they become this really strong weave where each and individual life, you can feel it in a sense that's a lot more real, how each and every individual has the possibility to contribute to that if they choose to. And at the same time, the dangers of if we fall for the tricks that the people have weaponized psychology against our minds, that the destructive impulses that can come, because human agency is a real factor in the development of, in the evolution of the planet, in our moral evolution, a topic that we looked at in some depth in chapter 12. The human being, it really does, in a far more concrete way, take on this ennobled perspective of being the crown of evolution. It's like in the biblical sense, so he created us. He created us as the crown of creation, and we have a important role to fulfill. in being that crowning process. And that is also the polar opposite of the other tendency that you were talking about earlier, this anti-natalism, this anti-human impulse that is also very strong, increasingly strong in society. It's like, let's not have any babies so that we don't destroy the world. Well, hold on. So human life has lost value, and this is completely, it takes us in a completely opposite direction. We want to ennoble ourselves so that we can be part of healing the planet and healing society and healing the relationships around us.
Yeah, and we're losing value because we're not generating value. We're and we've talked quite a bit about why that might be. It has to do with the denial of the self. Like, so you can deny things that exist. I'm going to evoke Kate here. The answer to our to providing for a society that helps cultivate and encourage the striving of human beings to fulfill themselves is the threefold social order the threefold social organism. And it's a social organism that exists. It's not something that we make up. We can either value it, make it part of our purpose, use our moral imagination to see the ways in which it can work isomorphically but as such isomorphically interpenetrating meaning and independent in all its manner, just like our body regulates itself in a threefold way. And if it doesn't, if one system takes over, then we're sick, to say the least, or probably dead if one system takes over. And it's the same in society. Of course, if the economy takes over, then everything follows that. And I thought what Daniel Schmachtenberger did with when the idea of capitalism was brought up, to say, yeah, it's not capitalism that's a problem, but let's use capitalism as a heuristic to see the problem that exists. Right? That the problem is that we're going to we're inevitable, unless we get underneath the cultural problem, the paradigm. We're just going to keep creating, no matter what our intentions are. We're going to keep creating dead ends. We're going to feed this exponentializing process of self-destruction. And I would argue that it would help Daniel if he read this work, and if he understood the nature of what it is to be a human being better. That's all I would say, and I think we can all learn that. I'm not saying that it's a particular limitation of his, but it would just bolster. It would help. And what Rudolf Steiner here is talking about is the reality of human nature. He's talking about the existential reality of human nature, both in its potential, but also in the elements that we have to work with to fulfill that potential.
Yeah. And this goes, for me, that what you're saying there goes back to what are the consequences if we do have a materialistic paradigm in which we live in so uniquely, and you and I assume we experience directly how the spiritual is something real. It's not just an emergent property of consciousness. It's something real. So if that is true, then anybody who lacks the insight about that truth, that means that there are certain aspects of reality which they just say don't exist, and therefore they will never be able to confront certain aspects of reality.
Yeah, I think we have the ingredients of a really good conversation with Zach coming out of this, now that I think about it, because if we look at how propaganda works and what a human being is, and what human beings can do to be impervious to propaganda, and what human beings can do to create to engage in creating together in creating a world that would find propaganda to be as exploitive as other crimes against humanity, as we see, like the educational system Zach refers to as a low-grade criminal treatment of children, right? And some would say it's more than low grade, right? And so with out of this understanding of what it is to be a human, we have an understanding of what it is to be contributing to a good society, and where that which is working against the nature of things can be overcome. And so I'm given great hope by this this triumphant chapter, I would say.
Quite a turnaround from a week ago. It's
quite a turnaround.
It's beautifully part of, isn't it? It
Quite
really
a
is.
turnaround, yes.
And this is, we reflected on this, but I think it's worth repeating again. When we did the Riddles of Philosophy, we were sort of bowled over by the impact of working together in a group, of working through these questions, how we enrich each other's perspective, but it's like something grows out of it that was completely unexpected. This whole, when we did the videos on Sophia, Philosophia and Anthroposophia, that was a growth out of that. And then this one here, so many of these chapters have come. I arrogantly thought I had a pretty good take on the philosophy of freedom a year ago, and now it's so obvious how shallow my understanding of it was. I mean, I had some understanding, but where we've taken this as a group and in our conversations that we've been doing as part of this, like the Essential series, it's a real testimony to try to encourage people. Okay, yeah, if you watch the videos, but get together with a group of people and read it together and discuss it together and see where it takes you in your thinking, and experience yourself growing in an appreciation of life and your own amazingness of being a human being. And it sounds very trite when I feel myself like I feel like I sound like I'm like a new ager when I say those type of words, but it's meant from like the deepest part of me. I feel more human. I can celebrate more the just living life, and that's through working through this together as a group.
Yeah, and in the conversation that Benita and Ian have, Benita beautifully describes what it is to be part of the world, to experience yourself as part of the world. So not only do I feel more human, like in this sort of, I've always like gained more surety, not certainty, of course, more humbled in relationship to the mystery, but more security. People want to feel this, right? Not security in the fear-driven sense, but in the sense that I have all the tools I need. That I've always felt, and I feel it growingly as I mature in relationship to this work, particularly as I mature generally. But as relates to this work, it has been a big accelerator for that. But I also feel in this, through probably because of the Riddles of Philosophy as well, but through this process with this work, I feel worlded again. Right? We live in a culture that has deworlded itself. It's committed domicide, essentially. And I don't mean that in the ecological sense. I mean it in the sense that there's no such thing as a world. It's a social construct. There's no such thing as a self. To say there's no such thing as a world and there's no such thing as a self, or to say basically the same thing, right? They belong together. I think that the glorious chapter that's coming, individuality and genus, is where he establishes individuals as species. And as to fulfill that speciation, not specialization, which is a sort of shadow version that results from the striving. I think this is another thing that I feel a lot of compassion for people who are striving, that don't have the spiritual conception, but are this close, or just need just to break free of the preconceived notions of new aginess and woo woo and all of this fear-based cynicism, say. And I feel part of the world as an individual. I can't feel part of the world as something other than as he says in the previous chapter, as an individual, as a organism. I follow the laws of the rest of nature. As an individual, I follow my own laws, because I am a spiritual organism that that is a species, like dogness is a species, or canineness, or whatever you say, or treeness, or in that. Then we can begin, as we feel part of the world, to communicate with the being behind each of those forms. And then lastly, what I want to say is this evolutionary part that Kate insisted we bring at the end of our last conversation, and I'm so glad she did, and that Matt touched upon in the previous conversation in our book group, and it was also picked up by other people. But I really liked what Matt had to say, which is that to explain to Chad that the evolution isn't a linear process that's bound to biology, and that we've emerged, as you mentioned, as epiphenomena out of the rest of nature somehow. And some people would say we're a disease, and some people would say we should feel a great gift that nature has given us. And then the other perspective is this anthropos archetype that was there in all other being forms that inhabit our existence are iterations of that. It doesn't mean we're better than they are. It just means that they're different iterations, and our responsibility is to come into the being that is informing their striving to be fulfilled, say, striving to fulfill their own evolutionary speciation, say.
I feel that ties in very the way you're describing it, because I haven't read chapter 14 yet. Ties in very tightly with this final point, that human agency becomes something far more important as you talk about the speciation of the individual. Is it time to go to the culture bit, do you think, or was there something else?
Let's see. Are we missing anything from the addendum, I guess, would be the question. I don't think so. I think we're ready to go to the culture bit, unless you have something. Let me look at my notes real quick. Yeah, I really think he brings in that this work brings in the what Kate mentioned in a comment on one of the threads on Facebook, which is that our bones are formed because of the same force that exists as relates to purpose, say, right? And but for us, we have to take it up and order our lives through purpose, without being ossified in the doctrinal or dogmatic way, say something like that. Kate, you can correct me if I'm wrong. And then the desire relates to the Luciferic, and then the moral imagination is the thing that ties them together as a unity. So that would be a summation of this chapter that I'd never seen before, but it has to do with the rest of the chapters, but particularly the previous two.
Yeah, I did like the way at the beginning you were connecting the huge importance of purpose in chapter 11, and then the development of moral imagination, intuition, and technique. They're forming a whole where this individual striving is still reconcilable with an individual free will. This individual agency that is not I think one of I've wrote not objectively determined. This was sort of one of those sentences that really stood out for me whilst reading it. No, there's nobody but you who determines what is valuable in life. And it's a strong, powerful statement, but what we've got is we've got the framework out of which that becomes the natural conclusion. When we understand purpose more thoroughly, when we understand and experience how moral imagination, moral technique are essential ingredients for bringing about change in life. So like this coming back down out of the spiritual realms, it's like incarnating something, making the transcendent immanent. And it comes to fruition in this chapter, the conversion into striving, into action. And on our picture that looked like the Ukrainian flag last week, it was this is the path of action.
Yes. And he reminds us in the end of this chapter that this book is about freedom.
Yeah.
Right? Because this can all sound a little bit like, wow, this guy has got a lot of great ideas and these people believe in him and he's a kind of a guru and that sort of thing. I can't emphasize enough. And I had this intuition before the latest read through that he needs to restate the purpose of this book. And that's what he does in the addendum, is that this is a book about freedom. This work is a book about freedom. And here is how freedom is not only real, it's not a construct, it's a responsibility.
Yeah.
It's a developmental process. He says, I'm not talking about half-developed human beings. In other words, the ubiquitous conditioning that Daniel Schmachtenberger talks so well about and differentiates so well relates to human nature versus ubiquitous conditioning, because we've become so cynical about what it is to be a human being. What it is to be a human being is to strive toward freedom. What freedom is a complex and beautiful reality that is also simply explainable because it's clear. It's not complicated. It just takes a busload of effort to occur, because it's freedom. If it didn't, it wouldn't be freedom.
That's right. Exactly. You can't impose it on people. They have to choose it of their own. They have to want it. They have to want it.
Want is a huge part of this chapter, right? It's not just desire. Desire is sort of depersonalized, and striving is like something that we do, but wanting is something that we hope against hope is true. And it is, people. I'm telling you, it is.
Okay, so this has been our slide for today. So what did I want to end with today? I was thinking about the joy of that I think was expressed by many people in the conversation yesterday in Matt's group. And there's a video that I used to play for my kids. It's a video of 10,000 Japanese singing Andi Freude. It's Beethoven who composed it, but it's based on the poem by Schiller called Andi Freude. And it is such a wonderful work of art that that brings in so many aspects of what I think is alive in the whole of this philosophy of freedom, but specifically in this chapter. I'm just going to focus on a couple of lines in the first two here. So this thy magic binds again what custom strictly divided. All humans become brothers where gentle wings abide. It flows for me in German when I've got to emphasize again, it's like in German it feels completely different, and when it's sung with the passion, and not just by those 10,000 Japanese, so like all in this amazing arena, but this overcoming of division. this is also part of our challenge. We are individuating, and we have to find ourselves back into communities of wholeness. And it is these spiritual ideas of love, of compassion, of the desire to work together, creating a better world to live in. These are all these are uniting ideas that enhance life, and are hugely challenged by the individuation that's going on. It's like at a materialistic level. So
Yeah, it's so beautiful. And it makes you really want um, this multiplied by a million, right? And so it becomes a narrative, not just a narrative of the deep desire to conjoin again with the world and with what it is to be human and with each other. The ways in which we've been torn apart brings the desire, in a way, for the value of it. Like, we can see it that way, but we also have to be able to say, look, it's dark, because to individuate and become free, you have to go through darkness, unknowing, the chrysalis stage, where the imago is participating in the universal orchestra. This is why Beethoven wanted to make this into this, this symphonic piece, because it sings the song of the. This also reminds me of Goethe's Holy Longing, this chapter, right? And in this chapter, he also brings back together the descriptions early on for the fundamental desires of what it is to be a human being, described by Goethe as the cleave, and Schiller as the cleave. Do you know that is
two souls live in my breast,
and they're both necessary. They're not to be gotten rid of. Do you know? And this is the plea he was giving to von Hartmann in this chapters. Like, dude, look, this is what it is to be human. It's an absolute celebration. It's not exactly the opposite. It's not what is it? An itching abscess on the ass of God or something. Says, to paraphrase that. Yeah, that's just absolutely beautiful.
And again, another bit. This here: whoever has succeeded in the great attempt to be a friend's friend, whoever has won a lovely wife, and to his jubilation, it's the joy of striving. Exactly the point that Stein is trying to make in this chapter. Hartmann, you've got striving completely wrong. It's not eternal pain and, oh God, as soon as I finish striving, I'm going to have to strive for something else and I'm going to feel the pain. No. This is a fundamental misunderstanding. Striving is what gives us meaning. Striving is that which creates joy in us. And as he says, like in the chapter, so if at the end of my life, even if I don't achieve my goals, there is salvation in the words, I did my best. I did my best. That is good enough. I can feel happy in that, even if I haven't been successful. And it turns this whole sort of like success mantra of having to succeed on its head. Of course, we would like to succeed, but actually it is the striving that is our human nature, wanting to change things. And let's go to like full divine here. Why did God, according to the Bible, create the world? Because he wanted to.
And it was good.
Because we want to.
And it was good.
That's right, yeah.
Yes, yeah, I love that. I also really, I've often thought of this, that what love is, in what it feels like in the human heart, is like hunger coming from the heart, right? Not hunger coming from the belly, but hunger coming from the heart. It's a never achievable yearning toward perfection, in a certain sense, while also indwelling that perfection as an ever striving question. Say the heart is a organ of the question at the face of the mystery, right? What ails thee, and fortes?
Yes, exactly.
The Holy Grail there lies behind the question. God, it's so beautiful, and this is a work of philosophy. We're talking about.
Yeah.
They're talking about it as if it were a symphony, which is exactly the way I've always wanted to share with people my experience of it. It is symphonic. It's so beautiful.
And interesting you use the word symphony there, because it was when I was reading, again, I might be repeating myself here, excuse me if I do, but it's also one of those great pleasures. I was actually rereading Steiner on John's Gospel, and it's in the 12th chapter there. He says that's like, without actually becoming initiated, the best way, the safest way, the most rigorous way of preparing yourself for a waking up, a conscious awakening to the reality of the spiritual life, is the philosophy of freedom. And he uses the phrase, it's something akin to this, that if you can reproduce the work, the ideas of the philosophy of freedom in the same way that a conductor leads a symphony, then you have that's the type of relationship that you should aspire to with the philosophy of freedom, so that it becomes this living being within you. It becomes this source of joy. It becomes this source of hope for humanity. It becomes this source of hope for yourself. It becomes it becomes an inner salvation as you dig deeper and deeper into this, because it's based in that most essential aspect of our nature, thinking. We did the hard work in chapters 1 to 7 of understanding our relationship to thinking, and when that's there as like this solid foundation, this spiritual activity living in us, then the true fruits of purpose, connection with the spiritual world, and heart-filled striving, they go beyond idealism. So idealism is like, it's like, I've got these nice ideas. It becomes a way of living your life in a far more intense way. Oh, that's my own experience of it.
Yeah, it teaches you how ideals are the most practical thing that you could possibly do as relates to achieving what it is to be a fulfilled and fulfilling what it is to be a human being. Hang on 1 second.
Yeah, sure.
Oh, you found your backpack. Good.
It was under my robe.
Okay, well, that's a good reason to keep your room clean, so you can fulfill what it is to be a human being. I just love that you brought this poem and this work, because I often think of Beethoven when I'm reading this work. Not that I'm a musicologist or even a great appreciator of music, but sometimes it's the only thing that can meet the genius that here lives, and it really inspires me to want to engage in the great works of humankind. What you said about the conductor, the quote, is what the conductor is doing is recomposing as if the originator. And isn't that what it is to be a human being? Like to share this with each other. And it's not Angus's thought that's bowling me over, but it's like, I'm eating what you're saying, and children do this to learn language, and we are works of art, and we are meant to fulfill this the artist's dream. And so I want to engage with all the art now. I want to engage with, it's a little bit luciferic, right? It takes that, like the desire pops up and says, I'm emboldened and I want to have desire to handle the most difficult things because of the unbelievable joy at the end of it. It's like that Leonard Cohen song too, Hallelujah.
Yeah.
You know that song? It's
Yeah.
just so, it's a cold and it's a broken hallelujah. It's blood and sweat and tears and I think that's part of what moved me yesterday to not be able to speak. So it's just people need to experience this. It's difficult. Like any great work of art is difficult, and this is a great work of art. And it's like what I say about the Christ experience, that of the time at Golgotha and the resurrection. That yes, it is all of these things that people say, which is it's a picture of the way the soul can configure itself right into incarnating a freedom that gives you gives you mastery over yourself, say something like that. But it also happened. And this is the thing about philosophy like this. And Saul Bellow writes in as a preface to one of Steiner's work that it's a work of art, but and Saul Bellow, of course, is a novelist, but it's a work of art. But he has the courage and imagination to say it without artifice, right? To celebrate human life as it fully exists without artifice, without provisional models and that sort of thing. It's modelless. It's both symbolic and it's the real thing.
Yeah. When you're talking about Alleluia by Leonard Cohen, this is the. So I'm going to have this bit here. I'm going to read the German because it's just so beautiful, and then you can read the English next to it. Sei umschlungen Millionen, diesen Kuss der ganzen Welt. Brüder üben Sternenzeit, muss ein lieber Vater wohnen. And this joy that comes from redeeming the striving that we've been talking about here, and the other aspects of the book. What a magical way of expressing joy. Be embraced, millions. I give this kiss. I give my kiss to the whole world, because you're starting to love life again in its most glorious way. And what other way is there so like expressing your love for life than wanting to hold the whole world?
Yeah, I want to grab some anthroposophists and shake them too, because right now I'm thinking of Walt Whitman's Song of Myself, right? Like, it's so beautiful in a similar way, the Song of Myself. I'm
gonna have to check that out. I don't know it.
Oh yes. Okay. Well, next time, and we'll make it.
We'll make it.
Well, it'll be perfect for individuality and genus. So I'm going to read it as so that's everybody's homework assignment.
Okay.
Song of Myself, Kate, Jonathan, the thousands and thousands of people who will see these videos in the future.
Say the name of it again, Jeff.
Song of Myself. It's a
Song of Myself by Walt Whitman.
It's part of the compilation called Leaves of Grass.
Okay.
American poet, genius, sort of part of the transcendental movement with Emerson and Alcott and Thoreau. And Thoreau, yeah. Yes.
That was a good one.
That was beautiful. Thank you.
Shall I? I'll press end record.
All right.